Good Tuesday morning. How is everybody doing today? I'm Jenny Gallagher with Joyful Heart Healthcare and Keto Nurses, and today we are going to talk about reflux. Couple of questions came up last week in our Facebook Live, so I thought this might be a good time to cover that topic. So while we wait on people to see their notification that we are live, I'm just going to chat just a little bit. I've already finished my coffee today, so I'm working on my water now. So good morning. This is Coffee with Jen with Joyful Heart Healthcare. Good morning, Brenda. Nice to see you. I see the numbers starting to pop up. So good morning, everyone. We are going to talk reflux today. We're going to talk about a few drugs. Some gut stuff. A few weeks ago, we did do a gut health video, and so we touched on reflux a little bit, but this particular video is dedicated just to reflux. So I thought that would be helpful for a bunch of folks. So good morning, Debbie. Morning, Pam. Numbers are popping up. Good morning, Diana. So reflux is really, really common. So we're going to break it down just a little bit and provide a little bit more detail for y'all. Okay. I'm itching all over. We worked in our yard some over the weekend, and I think the mosquitoes tried to tote me off. So if I'm wiggling and squirming, I'm scratching. Sorry about that. Good morning. Numbers are climbing. So everybody's joining. I'm glad to see y'all today. Hope the weather's good where y'all are. We're supposed to get a little rain today, which is great for our farmers around Nebraska, but it's sad for me because I love the sunshine. But I hope your weather's improving where you are. I saw some places in Colorado and Wyoming the last few days with snow. I'm like, oh my word, snow. Oh, there come my other Debbies. Good morning, Mariah. All right, yay, okay. So numbers are climbing. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, Joni. We are talking reflux today. So reflux affects a huge population today. And so we're going to break it down as to what the most common causes are and talk about a few of the drugs that people commonly use. Hopefully you can make better choices about your own health care and seek solutions. So reflux. What is reflux? So gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD as it's commonly called, often comes with various inflammation symptoms. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we scope you, if we do an EGD, if we put a scope down your throat into your esophagus, sometimes we can see erosions and irritations because the acid is coming up through the stomach sphincter. So when you normally swallow, food goes down through your esophagus, bangs on the door of the stomach, and the sphincter opens. And that allows food into the stomach, and then it closes back up nice and tight. However, it doesn't always stay closed. And so whenever pressure is put on that sphincter, even from below, it will open, and that allows acid to pop up into the esophagus where irritation and damage to the lining occurs. Acidic solution does not belong in the esophagus. The esophagus tissue is not designed to handle that kind of acid. And so that starts the erosion and the irritation that we call esophagitis. If it goes on for long periods of time, esophagitis becomes so severe that we call it Barrett's esophagitis. And that usually is a precursor to esophageal cancer. And so it's sort of this terrible decline that happens if you don't manage the reflux early in its disease process. So how do prescribers manage reflux? Well, the first thing they do is offer you medications. Sometimes we start on our own with things like over-the-counter antacids. And there's a variety of those. Tums, Rolaids, Maalox, like boatloads of antacids are marketed today, both generic and name brand. And they're designed to alkalinize the acid in your stomach. And so you take that antacid, and that product balances out the acid in your stomach, reducing the risk that acid comes up into the esophagus when you burp or belch or have indigestion or heartburn. So when you start with those, on occasion, it can be fine. Most of those are calcium-based products or some similar chemical compound. The calcium is a great antacid because it literally does balance out the acidity, the pH of your intestinal tract in your stomach. However, if people are using these over-the-counter antacids more than 2 or 3 times a week, that's when most people will seek out the advice of a prescriber, because it's becoming more and more common. It's impacting life a little more. Some people will start to eliminate foods from their diet that they think contribute to the reflux and the acid indigestion. And so that is how this normally progresses. Once your prescriber evaluates you and says, yep, I think you're right, this is reflux, we're going to put you on this medicine, they usually choose either a PPI, which is a proton pump inhibitor, or an H2 blocker or an H2 antagonist. PPIs are things like the azoles, omeprazole, pantoprazole, Nexium and Dexilant or Prilosec are some of the brand names, but the generic name is the chemical word for the medicine, and they all end in azole, A-Z-O-L-E. Those are all PPIs. What do? They proton pump inhibit. They stop the proton pump from releasing acid, okay? Ideally, that medicine is taken on an empty stomach so that it has time to signal the stomach, stop making acid. If that medicine is taken with other food or medicine, the stomach gets mixed signals and it will not be nearly as effective as if it's taken on an empty stomach. So make sure you read your labels, look up your drugs on Epocrates.com or rxlist.com or drugs.com. Loads of free databases abound in this day and time for you to research your medicine, okay? The other drug class that is often used, less common today because PPI sort of took over the market, but H2 blockers, things like Zantac, Acifex, ranitidine, those ends in idine. I-D-I-N-E. Those are H2 blockers. They are antihistamines, but they're not the same class as allergy meds. Sometimes people with severe allergies will take both H2 blockers and the allergy class, which are H1 blockers, because of the severity of their allergies. Some people will use both of these classes of antihistamines in the presence of EOE. EOE is considered a very rare disease. It's eosinophilic esophagitis. That's an allergic response that happens in the esophagus to various foods or chemicals ingested. So EOE is becoming more and more common. It used to be almost non-existent. I don't know if it's becoming more common because we're recognizing it more, or simply because of something in our environment and our diets that contribute. But EOE can be pretty severe. So let's see, I have a question or two. Pam says, will Barrett's esophagitis heal? Sometimes, Pam, it does. It's really rare for it to heal and resolve completely, mostly because the majority of mainstream providers don't treat it thoroughly. They treat it with PPIs, which help, but that is not going to completely resolve the problem. It does not always advance to cancer, though, and that may be what your main question really infers to. Barrett's esophagitis does not always advance to cancer. If you can find the root cause and start fixing that, then it will not continue to occur. Therefore, the damage won't progress. Does that help? Okay, so reflux is often treated with over-the-counter antacids. And then once you get a prescription, it's usually managed with PPIs or H2 blockers. The problem is both of these classes of drugs, both your PPIs and the H2 blockers, both contribute to a variety of side effects, especially with long-term use. In fact, just a few years ago, advice from various GI organizations have put out that we should no longer, as prescribers, we should no longer prescribe H2 blockers or PPIs more specifically long-term because of the significant side effects, mostly nutritional deficits. So let's think about this logically. This is part of where I talked about gut health a few weeks ago, and I mentioned the reflux. But let's think about this logically. If you're taking a medicine that's designed to stop acid production, what's going to happen to the food you ingest? Is the food you ingest going to be broken down appropriately for absorption in the small intestine? No. And that has become a real problem. The majority of Americans are malnourished. That's what it boils down to. Between PPIs and poor dietary habits, insulin resistance, and all the metabolic dysfunction that comes with all that, most of Americans today are malnourished. And so because the PPIs are linked to low B12, low magnesium, poor protein absorption, lots of nutritional deficits begin to develop. The problem is not only are these problems developing, these nutritional deficits building and happening, they're worsening over time. And mainstream medicine doesn't typically look for these issues. It's very rare to get a prescriber to check for your B12 level or your magnesium RBC level. Sometimes they'll check a mag level, a magnesium level, but they won't get the appropriate one, and therefore it's not very helpful. The regular magnesium level that mainstream medicine checks is very difficult to see an imbalance when it's checked, because the bones and the bloodstream work together to keep that level fairly well balanced. So that's why we typically, in functional medicine, we recommend checking the RBC mag. That's a more descriptive perspective. We're able to see more about your magnesium level in use, and that tells us more about your deficit or not. But PPIs are really found to create significant magnesium deficits. And for those of us in functional medicine, we think that snowballs into more problems with our bone health. So if you are taking a PPI like pantoprazole or omeprazole, any of those azoles, and you're taking them for weeks and months and years on end, you might want to reconsider that, especially if you get blood work that indicates some of these malnutrition problems. The H2 blockers don't cause as many severe nutritional deficits as the PPIs. However, they still will cause some, especially with long-term use. Okay. All right, we've got a couple questions. So Star and Nancy are both asking about bicarb and water. So those are still going to reduce the acid. They're meant to alkalinize the acidity in the stomach. So it's a similar process. It's probably less troublesome to organs and digestion, but it still is going to prevent you from breaking down your nutrition and eventually not let your body absorb nutrients from the food you're eating. Sodium bicarb for kidney disease. So it's probably safer for kidney disease than most of the other prescription drugs for sure, Nancy. Let's see. Okay, I think I've answered all the questions so far. Okay. Any other questions about reflux or the drugs before we move on? Any other questions? Okay, I don't see anything popping up. So we're going to move on. I'll come back to questions in a minute if there are some. So then let's talk about why do people get reflux? Where is it coming from? Jan says, let's answer this before, because this is exactly where we're headed, Jan. Some thyroid groups say reflux can be from low stomach acid. No, that is not true. Low stomach acid does not happen, okay? Low stomach acid only happens, I'll say it doesn't happen, except in the case of poor salt intake, okay? If we do not consume adequate salt, then the body cannot produce adequate hydrochloric acid, okay? Do I need to say that again for those in the back? Okay? Low stomach acid typically does not happen except in the case of poor salt intake. Remember, salt is sodium chloride. Sodium is used for the sodium-potassium pump and cellular function. Chloride is used for hydrochloric acid production, the acid in your stomach, okay? So, therefore, Jan, going along with that whole process, if you are not making enough stomach acid, then that needs to be addressed because you're not going to break down food and therefore you're not going to absorb nutrition, okay? So reflux is not from low stomach acid most of the time, okay? 90% of the time, give or take, reflux is actually from chronic constipated stool, okay? Now, most of you have your own perception of what the definition of constipation is, and that is going to impact your belief system, okay? The problem is most of us think that constipation means you're skipping long periods of time without a bowel movement. That's only one symptom, okay? So you can have fairly regular, almost daily bowel movements and still have constipated stool impacting your gut health. How is that possible? Oh my, yes, it is possible because think of your intestinal tract, okay? Most people imagine it like a smooth PVC pipe. So we've got this pipe going from end to end, from your mouth all the way to your bottom, okay? And it's this nice smooth PVC pipe, right? Wrong. Take that PVC pipe and smush it up. And now what happens to that PVC pipe? Lots of little pockets. And then you add 90-degree turns that are like hairpin on each other, that are not even really 90, but more like a 60-degree turn at the top of your intestinal tract. In your colon, right under your rib cage, you have two of those big hairpin turns. One's under your right side and one's under your left side. And so when waste comes up on the right side and then has to go across under your diaphragm and lungs and then down to the sigmoid colon, that's a lot of traveling. That's a lot of nooks and crannies and little pockets where stool can get stuck. The most common problem with gas pain is in those two locations, because air is going to rise to the top. And so people will report terrible gas pain right under their lungs on one side or the other, depending on where that gas is rising. It's why some people report terrible chest pain with their indigestion and heartburn, because it's almost impossible to distinguish the difference between a heart chest pain and a gas chest pain in some people, simply because of the location of the gas pain. So gas pains that happen typically happen up in those really high parts of the colon, where it's switching from ascending to transverse and transverse to descending. Okay, so Google a picture of your colon and look at where waste enters the colon and where waste leaves the colon. Study that picture. There's even a Bristol stool form scale where you can rank the type of stool you're pooping on a regular basis, so you know if you are pooping normal or abnormal. Okay. So those are little tips that can be really helpful as you figure out if you are constipated or not. Other things that can be related to constipation and slow gut motility might be just the things you're consuming. If you're consuming a lot of grains, you can actually damage the lining of the mucous membrane in your intestines, small and large, and that can result in significant malabsorption, because then you wind up with what we call leaky gut syndrome, and that means that important nutrients and toxins are both able to leak through the intestinal wall out into the rest of the body, and that can cause symptoms, pain, all sorts of issues. So you don't want to do that. But grains are probably the most toxic thing to our guts. Think about people that eliminate wheat or gluten. Gluten-free is like the massive buzzword today. And so people eliminate gluten and they feel so much better. But a lot of times gluten is not the only problem with the diet. And so they'll feel better, but they won't get 100% of their symptoms relieved, because when they take out gluten, they're putting in other grains and high carb foods that might be just as inflammatory, just not as difficult to manage symptomatic wise. So eliminating grains is probably the number one best treatment for fixing your gut. But if you eat a lot of grains, some of them are going to ferment, and that's going to produce gas, and that's going to produce pain. And so when that happens, you wind up with belly aches and belly pain, and then reflux and constipation ensue. It's sort of a downward spiral kind of thing, or like a snowball running downhill. You start with a little problem, and as it continues to roll down the hill, it picks up speed and mass, and that becomes more and more of a problem. And that's kind of what happens with gut health. Okay. Questions about any of that so far? One of the most common symptoms, Diana, I'm getting to your question in a minute. One of the most common things I hear from patients is, I can't possibly have constipation because I have terrible diarrhea every day. Okay, well, let's think about the physiology of that. Where is the liquid stool coming from? Where did liquid waste originate? If you're thinking about the digestive tract, we chew food, we swallow balls of chewed up food. In the stomach, the acid comes out, begins to liquefy it, and then it enters the small intestine in a more liquid form, and becomes more and more liquid as it passes through the small intestine, as more and more enzymes and actions occur on the food you've consumed. So the small intestine is what's creating the liquid stool. So if you are passing only liquids, your colon is probably jam-packed with such hard stool that only the liquid stuff is able to make it through. Okay? That's what I find to be the very most common cause of chronic diarrhea. chronic diarrhea is almost always a symptom of constipated stool. It's stuck. The pockets are not pushing the waste out. They're literally just sitting there holding all this waste in. Just, it's piling up. And so as the thick, stuck stuff sits there, only watery stool is able to squeeze through there. No waste can come out. So that's something to really think about, because if you're having chronic diarrhea and reflux, I can guarantee you your colon is not working right. That it's just not physically possible for all of that to be happening in the presence of good, healthy gut function. Okay. So with that said, now we're coming to Diana's question. So if stuck stool is sitting in the colon, it's kind of like, imagine a water hose. You've put a faucet on the end, a little hand nozzle where you can squirt the water your garden with, right? So you turn that off so it doesn't spray you when you turn the faucet on the wall back here. So we go to the wall and we turn the faucet on, and then we go about our business. We go do a little weeding in the garden. We pick a few weeds. We clean the garden up a little bit, and then we go back to the water hose and we pick up the nozzle. What has happened to the tube because of the pressure? Okay, so you've got this tube that's water pressure is being forced on it big time out of the wall faucet, but the end hand nozzle is closed, so the water can't escape where it's supposed to. What's happening to this hose? Okay, so we're looking at the hose and it's starting to get fatter and fatter and fatter. If you leave it sitting there in the sun, what's going to happen to that water hose? It's going to really swell up. It's going to back up. And that same kind of thing is what's happening when your colon is not emptying your waste appropriately. Okay? When that happens, there is backwards pressure pushing up, and that's the most common cause of your reflux and your hiatal hernia. Okay? So a hernia, by definition, is the forceful pushing through of another body part or muscle wall. So for instance, if you have abdominal wall muscle and you have a hernia on your belly button or down low in your inguinal region, and you have a hernia that bulges through there, that hernia is intestine. Okay? You have intestine pushing through that muscle wall. Well, a hiatal hernia is a place in the structure of your intestines where sphincter muscle from the gut, your stomach, pushes up through the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is your breathing muscle, and it is not designed to have extra pressure put on it from your stomach. Therefore, that's painful and it's uncomfortable. And so that needs to be addressed. But it's because there's pressure from below pushing that up. Okay? Does that make sense, y'all? Is everybody tracking? So I will tell you that reflux is probably one of the most commonly diagnosed problems today. Probably one of the most commonly prescribed drugs are the PPIs and the H2 blockers. However, if you think about all of the stuff we just talked about, is that truly fixing the problem? No, it's a Band-Aid. So for severe cases, or if you have Barrett's esophagitis, you may need the drugs, at least for a while. But fixing the root cause, your digestion and the gut movement, the gut motility, is really key to fixing the problem. It's why I send all of my patients that I see a copy of my gut protocol. It is medical advice, so I can only send it to patients with whom I have a patient relationship. But it's why I send all my patients this gut protocol. If you do not fix your gut and your digestive processes, there is no way you can be adequately nourished. If your acid can't break down the food particles, your small intestine can't absorb the food particles, and therefore you waste them through the toilet. Okay? It's really simple. Mainstream medicine tries to make it this big cloud of, meds and issues, and they want to do scans and scopes, and it's pretty simple functionally. Food goes in, it goes through specific processes to be able to digest that food, and if at any point in there digestion is altered, you're not going to absorb nutrition. It's really that simple. And so it's extremely important to make sure that your colon, which is secreting waste, is secreting that pretty much daily. Now, I will tell you, there's extremes on both ends of that. There are some gut experts that say, well, if you put something in your mouth, within an hour, you're supposed to poop. Okay? I can see that. It makes logical sense. If you put something in a tube on one end and it fills up all the way to the other end, eventually when you put something in, something's going to come out the other end. Like, it's just logical. That makes good sense to me. However, our bodies aren't quite that straightforward, and it doesn't always work that way. There are some people that will do that. They will have a meal, and within 45 minutes to an hour, as the waste begins to move through the digestive tract, peristalsis is triggered, and they go have a bowel movement about an hour after their meal. That is pretty common. That's not average, but that is pretty common. There are some people, on the other hand, that truly believe they can have a bowel movement every 3 or 4 days and be normal. I don't find that to be true, to be honest. There are some experts that say that. I don't find that to be true. Most of my patients have lots of health problems, lots of metabolic dysfunction, lots of nutritional deficits. And so when they tell me they're having a bowel movement every second or third day, and then we dig through all this other stuff, I'm like, that's not helping your digestion. That's not helping your nutrient absorption. For things to sit still that long, it's not healthy. Okay? There was a study a few years ago that came out that suggested that if you weren't having, or how did it go? The findings were basically that the more days in between bowel movements that you didn't go put you at higher risk for colon cancers. Okay, I don't know how true it is or how true it came to be. It was a small study, and they looked at it wasn't a real small study, but they looked at a whole bunch of records is what they did, and they compared a whole lot of information and studies, more like a lit review. And so they compared all this stuff, and that's how they came to this conclusion. But basically, they thought the more days you go without a bowel movement, the higher the risk of colon cancer. So what they basically were thinking is that if you went 4 days between a bowel movement, you had a higher risk of colon cancer than somebody that only went 2 days or 1 day. And so that is a possibility. And that's kind of logical too. If poop is just sitting there, that's a waste product. Why would you want waste products just sitting and not moving through your intestinal tract? That's toxic. We don't want that. We want it moving and eliminated. That's why we have the elimination system that we have. Okay? So those are all some things to ponder and think about. I don't know that I buy into all of them, but I try to be really logical and skeptical, thinking about the normal function. As a general rule, you can do a couple of experiments to determine this for yourself. As a general rule, it takes about 24 to 36 hours for waste to move from your mouth to your toilet. So time it. It's easy to see if you eat a serving of corn. Corn will not be digested. You will move it right through your intestinal tract, and you can determine how fast food is moving. Another food product to try is tomatoes. If you eat tomatoes with peel on it, you will see the peeling eliminated in your waste within a day or two. So you can time it. You can do your own experiment to see how fast food moves through your particular intestinal tract. Anybody got a science fair next year coming up? This is a good, fun experiment for middle schoolers who love to talk waste products. So lots of fun trying to figure this out. But that's something to think about. If you don't know how long it's taking your waste to go through your system, you can time it. But technically it should be 24 to 36 hours. If it's faster than that, you probably have a little bit of digestion problem, hypermotility. And if it's longer than 36 hours, you probably have some hypomotility going on. And so both of those problems outside the 24 to 36 hours need to be addressed. You need to look into your root causes. What's going on and what can you do about it to fix it? Josephine says, are reflux problems genetic? Rarely. Not very often. That is extremely rare for them to be genetic. Nancy says, if I start my day with 16 ounces of water, no BM. If I start with coffee, diarrhea, even though I drink the same amount of coffee. So coffee is a really good natural laxative. The reason we don't always have a BM with water is because water is going to move through the system rather quickly, especially first thing in the morning. So all night we've been dry. Okay, we've been dry all night. Remember that dryness is a problem. The body wants to balance out your water, your salt, and your other electrolytes. And so if you just drink water, your body has been dry all night. It's going to rehydrate all those cells. It's not really going to go toward your colon very well. You drink coffee, it's a natural laxative. It's moving things out. Okay. So that might explain that, Nancy. You might try another experiment to see if you drink salty water, what happens with that 16 ounces of water, and see how that impacts your digestive tract. Mm-hmm. Yep. So remember, coffee is a mild diuretic. It's going to make your cells excrete water. And it, as a stimulant, it can stimulate bowel movements, much like a laxative does. If you use coffee with coconut oil, that can be a really strong laxative for some people, because both coffee and coconut oil are recognized as natural laxatives. We don't like laxatives on a daily basis. Some people will say, well, if I'm constipated, then the fix is going to be a laxative. So I'll just take this laxative every day. Well, that's not healthy either. The balance is what's important here. You want to poop with normal food intake, normal water, salt, electrolyte intake, without having that delay in gastric function. And so speeding it up just to have loose stool and diarrhea is not ideal. It can be okay on an occasion, once or twice a year, to go through and kind of clean everything out and reset your gut. There are lots of gut cleanses and products available today. I'm not a big fan of some of them for sure. So definitely do your due diligence and research each product carefully. But my gut protocol is available to my patients. If you have seen me and you can't find your copy of the gut protocol, you can email me or send a message through the portal, and we will send a copy of that back to you. It has been updated a little bit the last few months. I've made a couple changes, tweaks, nothing significant, just a few clarifying statements that were added. So, but the gut protocol is designed to empty everything out and then use specific supplements over the following weeks to kill off any kind of bad guys, bad bacteria, candida, yeast overgrowth, those kinds of things, establishing a better gut flora for you so that your body is able to digest food. Remember that most of your digestion occurs through bacterial use of the products we consume. So your bacteria are eating and digesting, and that their waste products are providing a lot of the vitamins and nutrition that we actually absorb and use. I know it sounds gross, but that's the way it works. That's what digestion is all about. And if you don't have healthy bacteria lining the gut in the small and the large intestine, you're not going to be absorbing all the nutrition that your body really needs. And that's where the malnutrition comes from. So, okay. All right. Questions about any of that? Does that help y'all understand a little bit more about reflux? Okay. Last thing, number one, if you're a patient of mine, a current patient, and you want to join my specific Facebook group for my patients, where I have lots of graphics and articles and videos posted in an organized fashion, for you to follow and read and study to help you master taking control of your health. You can send an email to joyfulheart4722@gmail.com, and we will get you added to that group if you've been seen in the last 90 days or so, give or take. I had several patients that fell off the plan the last couple of months. And so there were people that were due for April and May labs and did not get them done. So this is your reminder to reach out, get those labs done, get you scheduled for your follow-up. I typically don't continue prescribing your medications if you're not keeping up with your visits. So it's really important to keep your health on top of things. And so you gotta get those visits in to make sure you stay healthy. I have tickets for anybody in the Omaha area. So free baseball tickets to the local Omaha Storm Chasers game on June the 12th. If you would like some of these tickets or know someone in the Omaha Council Bluffs area that might want these tickets, I have boatloads of them available and we'll give them away free. So just let me know how I can get these tickets to you. A couple questions. Renee says amazing information. Casey says what kind of salt? Whatever kind of salt you want. I don't care. I'm not the salt police. You have to have iodine. You have to have salt. How you get the two of them is your choice. Okay? You have to have iodine. You have to have salt. So just get whichever kind of salt you prefer and then make sure you know where your iodine's coming from. Okay? I don't see any other questions. Okay. All right. If you need help with your reflux, let me know. We'll get you on the schedule. Try to help figure out what the problem is and try to help you get that managed and treated. Okay. Y'all have a great day. Jenny Gallagher with Joyful Heart Healthcare.